This is Keith Ward with Visual Studio Magazine, and joining me here at Visual Studio Live is Jason Bach with Magenic. Jason, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Okay, so tell us what you do with Magenic.
Well, I'm a principal lead consultant, so my role primarily is to go out to our different clients, and I focus mostly on architecture and design of applications. Still do some coding, still love to do that, but that's primarily my focus. I also spend some time doing conferences like this, or co-camps, or user groups, and I also, on my own spare time, actually write some books. Just came out with a book recently as well. So,
oh, great. Well, you can plug that. Well, what's the book?
It's called Metaprogramming in .NET, and it's written by me and another gentleman named Kevin Hazard.
Okay.
And it just came out a couple months ago. So
very good. So look for that.
Yep.
Okay, so tell us about some of the sessions that you've been presenting here this week.
So there are two that I've done already, and that was with the Modern Apps track. One was called Business Layer Implementation, which was primarily on how do you create business objects, how do you create a business layer for your applications. And then one I did this morning with Andy Tinkham was on unit testing and testing in general. And my half of the talk was primarily on how do developers write tests and write good unit tests. And then I have two tomorrow. One of them is on static analysis in .NET using the code analysis engine that comes in Visual Studio, and then the other one is called Managing the .NET Compiler, which is all about Project Rosalind.
Okay, so so being a .NET expert, you're certainly very familiar with the latest version of .NET, which is 4.5. And you gave a talk where you're giving a talk specifically on the compiler. Can you talk about that a little bit and why that is going to be important? The latest compiler for .NET developers. What's the new stuff that's going to excite them?
Okay, so back up a little bit. Project Rosalind is a project that's been going on a long time now at Microsoft. In fact, I think it finally started to see a little bit of the light of day in 2008, and at Build in October 2011 is when they finally released a CTP for it, so people could start playing with the bits and see what it's like. And essentially what Project Rosalind is rewriting the compiler. So right now the compilers that are in both VB and C# are unmanaged. They were written in C or C++, and there's no real good way to interact with it. You give it your code files, spits out an assembly at the end, but that's it. You don't get any real good information about what your code actually means and being able to use that in other scenarios. So with this project, not only are they rewriting the compilers to be in a managed language, but they're also going to open this up to be used in other scenarios, like being able to do refactorings and have almost like a real-time code analysis. So as I'm just typing in my Visual Studio editor, if I make a mistake, I can have rules created so that I can see these errors show up as soon as I'm typing, which is a huge advantage for a developer.
Okay, exactly. So the Rosalind project, we've covered that in our magazine some as well. What is the current status of that?
I think they've now released 3 CTPs, and I think the last, so they did October 2011, June 2012, and then September 2012. So they're due for another one. They don't say when it's coming, but they're going to have probably at least one more CTP to get out there, and they've been changing and refining their APIs as they do this. So that's the current status of it. There's no go live bits as of yet, but they're getting very close to hitting what is their first milestone, which they've said they have to be able to support compiling code, which sounds obvious. If you're making a compiler, you got to be able to compile the code. But they said of anything that you do as a developer, it's using the compiler probably more than anything else that you do, and that's got to work. It's got to work fast, and it's got to work correctly. So they have to make sure that they can support VB11 and C# 4.5. And the last I checked, I think they were just one version back, and they were really close to having it all done. So they'll be close to having something that I think will be, feature complete in terms of compiler, but then it still's got to go through beta cycles and whenever they're going to release it, which they are being very quiet about. They're not saying anything about release dates yet. Okay.
So the latest CTP then, you've obviously been using it a lot. Is it stable? Is it fast? I mean, does it feel like it's near complete?
I think they're getting close to knowing what their API shape should be and what are some of the services and features they want to provide. It is a CTP. So when, for example, if you're writing what they call a template that they call a code issue, so it's basically an extension that you're writing in Visual Studio, so that as you're running in the editor and I'm typing, I see an error, that's the project type that you use. What happens is when you run that opens up another version of Visual Studio that you can debug, and I usually run these things in VMs because I don't want this on my main operating system. So I got a VM running Visual Studio with CTP bits that's running another version of Visual Studio. That can be a little, a little slow in and of itself. They also have a version that they added for packaging Roslyn, which is to go through NuGet. So if you don't want all the extensions and all the add-ins and stuff that you can do in Visual Studio, if you just want to play with the compiler APIs, you can just go to NuGet and go get the Roslyn assemblies. So that way you're not getting as much, but then you can get a feel for how you can get syntax trees and so on. So there's a couple ways of doing it right now. Again, the CTP bits, they are CTP, so it does feel it's a subjective feeling. It does feel a little slow, but that's kind of common with a lot of CTP bits from Microsoft, is that they're probably capturing more debugging information, they're doing more things, so it will be slower. And then once they finally get to betas and release, all of a sudden they're stripping a lot of that out, and you see just a performance improvement just from that perspective.
Well, Jason, thanks very much for joining us.
All right, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.